just so you know, my name is Jim Petrowitz. I'm the business development guy for Auros, but you're not here to hear me talk. You're here today to hear Miss Ashley Miller. So Ashley is the customer experience manager for Auros, and she does a lot of things for us. One of the things is onboarding new customers, and she prepares a lot of materials for that. So what she's going to take you through today is some fundamentals. Without further ado, Ashley, please take it away.
All right, thank you, Jim. All right, so as Jim said, I work a lot with our customers on onboarding. I develop a lot of different learning experience materials, but I don't often get to be in front of the customers. So it's very exciting today to actually be able to share some of the different materials that we've developed. This one is going to focus on the fundamentals. So as we heard in the previous presentation, Sarah was talking about the knowledge-aware approach and the definition of that being a comprehensive approach to continuously collect, deliver, and actively apply knowledge within the flow of work. So this is this game-changing approach to knowledge management. But when we break it down and we think about how do we collect, deliver, or sometimes called provision, or apply this knowledge within Auros IQ, how are we going to accomplish that? Well, these are facilitated through the Auros assets, and that's what we're going to be going through today. So there are 4 of the fundamental Auros assets. I'll say it's not all of them, but 4 of the fundamental ones that we'll go through today are the assessment, the community of practice, project, as well as the knowledge packet. And for each of these, we're going to really go through the definition of what they are and some examples to help you understand at a baseline, what is this asset? We'll go through their role in that collection, delivery, and application of knowledge. And we're also going to talk about the relationships between the assets. How do they interact? And how does that knowledge flow through the flow of work? All right, so to start off here, the assessment. You see right here, it's big, it's orange. It's a very important thing to us. So the technical definition of it is it's a comprehensive tool set to facilitate a business process. When we kind of break that down, it sounds kind of like a mouthful here, but the tool set to facilitate is really, this is where the work is being done. This is where the action is taken. And business processes are the things that we put into Auros IQ. They're the things we want to be working on, have happening. So that assessment is really the activities of a business process or facilitating that business process itself. And they can be used in a couple of ways, or ways we like to say that this is where you should look for an assessment, or this is where we want to look to identify where an assessment may fit. The first of that is the omission of knowledge is painful. So these are any areas where if you forgot to do something, if you skipped a step or anything like that, that would be a painful thing. So I think the most easy way to think about that is these checklist type items. You want to go through the list, you want to say that I've done each of those things, and just make sure that everything is going well. The second is that standard work exists, and this can be standard work, this could be standard process. This is where there's a procedures, there's a set of best practices that you want to follow, and that standard work is something that we could also see putting into an assessment. And the third is that there's a need for traceability or audit. So this could be you have certifications that you have to undertake, or there's a design review. These are anywhere where you might want to have evidence collected. You might want to see this trail of where this decision was made, what things were happening at what points, where did we make decisions. And an assessment works really well there because it's collecting all of that information in one place. Sometimes the assessment can even, serve as that evidence that you've done everything correctly, but we like to think of assessments also traceability or audit needs. And like I said before, assessments are really important to us. We like to say that assessment first approach that Josh and Sarah kind of previewed in that presentation before us. Well, we collect, deliver, and apply knowledge, and it might seem logical to think that you're going to collect knowledge first, and then you're going to think about how you're going to deliver it, and then you're going to apply it. We actually like to think about how we're applying it first and kind of have that dictate the things behind it. So we're going to go back later and think about how it's delivered and go back later and think about the actual knowledge. So when we think about assessments, we often start with the assessment, understanding how it fits into our workflow and understanding how it fits into that business process. So again, assessment really big right in the middle here. We're going to build upon that. And we have 5 different critical functions that work for assessments. The first of that is that it captures and makes use of context. So when you are creating an assessment, you're creating this work to be done within Auros IQ, you're going to be collecting some context about this occasion. Why are you doing this? What's happening? So the first thing it's going to do is collect and make use of that context. And that, in one part, enables the provisioning of knowledge. When you have context, you can understand what knowledge should be provisioned into that assessment. It also is really the place, if we think about it on a fundamental nature, the assessment, this toolkit, this tool set, it's where those knowledge packets are delivered. So it is literally where we're moving the knowledge packets into, and it's enabling that provisioning of knowledge. And as we'll see in the next couple slides, it takes in information both from the project and the community to help make sure that the proper knowledge is provisioned or delivered into that assessment. We also are going to facilitate the application of knowledge. So as I've said a couple times, it's where the work is being done. So with this knowledge delivered into an assessment, users are going to interact with it. They're going to look at any instructions that might come in from it. They're going to put inputs in if it's a value table or something where you are providing different evidence of what's happening. You might have an issue that you run into. You might provide an explanation. The application of knowledge is ultimately going to, lead to this conformance state. Is it conforming in green, red, pass, fail, whatnot? We're going to facilitate that application of knowledge all within the assessment. The user just goes to the assessment to do their work. As all of this is happening, one of the great parts about Auros is that's creating a usable data footprint. So every time there's an action taken, there's an associated data point that's collected, presented, can be reportable to you. So a number of different aspects that we're creating data, and we'll talk a little bit about it more in the different assets as we go through this presentation, but as a byproduct of what's already happening with the work, you're going to create this great usable data footprint that you can use to continuously improve the knowledge and improve your workflows. And lastly, it supports communication. So the assessments work on a life cycle from creating it to working on it to it being completed, and there's different people involved in the different roles. Different people involved at different points in the process, I should say. So with the assessment, we have Auros set up to inform the right people at the right time about what is going on. So the assessment is really facilitating that communication, so there's no kind of lapses in time that's going on and nobody is unaware of what is happening, and everyone stays in communication and aware of this workflow. So with the assessment kind of taken care of there, again, the center of everything in this presentation, we're going to move on to the community of practice. So the technical definition of this one is the persistent organizational unit. And to break this one down a little bit, it's an organizational unit because it contains assessments, it contains our knowledge packets within it, and it has a number of different configurations and settings that I'll talk about in a second. But this persistent word is an interesting one because it's always there. It's going to exist as a community, and you can run multiple different assessments through it. You can run multiple different occasions of workflows through it, but it's going to stay there persistently. And we'll talk project as kind of the opposite of that in a second. And when we think about COPs, our recommended way to think to define our COPs is with a business process. So the process allows us to really focus on the configurations in the COP that are specific to what's happening, as opposed to some people also do it by organizational grouping, which is fine. It's a viable way that we can think about it. But when you have an organizational grouping or a product, you're now having to do configurations in the COP that sets up the various assets that have to work across a number of different processes or across a number of different workflows. But if we do it by business process, it's a great way to set yourself up for success. And it's also a great way to really be able to easily identify where our assessments fit in because we're thinking about business process first and where those assessments go. As far as critical functions, as I said before, it's enforcing business process configurations. So without getting too advanced on this, there's probably hundreds of different things that you can do at a COP level that sets up the different assets. We can set up things about the assessment, how it's delivered, are there approvals on it, who can create it. When we talk about knowledge, who's writing the knowledge processes, does it go through a review process, anything like that. And this is one of those things that can really enforce those business process configurations And through this workflow that we're building out here, you'll see how it kind of flows through it. Additionally, it can institute framework for the provisioning of knowledge. So when we are bringing knowledge in, we'll see that the knowledge packets also sit within the community of practice. So it's starting that framework just from housing the knowledge packets within it. But there's also settings and configurations that allow the right knowledge to be provisioned into the assessment at the appropriate time. And finally, it fosters continuous improvement of the knowledge base. Because the knowledge is residing within the COP, there are a number of things that we track about the knowledge, the vitality of the knowledge, how often it's used. We have this kind of data footprint of knowledge, and the COP helps people to continuously improve it and track how that data is used, or the knowledge is used. So, moving on to projects. The project is the transient organizational unit. So as opposed to community of practice that's persistent, this one is transient, and projects are all about the occasion or the context that you're setting. So projects are meant to be a little bit more finite in nature. They're not always going to last. They're kind of used for a specific purpose. And the other thing is that projects actually move kind of across these assessments and COPs. If we were to kind of stack this, so this would be another one of these kind of COPs here, projects can navigate across the various assessments. So if your project goes through multiple different COPs, it goes through multiple different processes, you can continue to use that and build a data footprint on the project no matter what you're executing or what business process you're executing there. And these can be defined based on a fixed time frame, which is probably what we see most often. That's literally a project, or in some cases a program. Or in some cases, they are an ongoing time frame. We have some customers that may use a supplier as their project. It might not be something that's, a start and end date, but it's a supplier, and we're capturing information about that. Auros IQ uses customers as a project in some instances. So there is some variability on how you can set up the project. As far as the critical functions, a project is going to define the context used across business processes. Like I said, project is really, you think about project, you think about context. So it's providing you this occasion of why you're using that. And with that, it's providing different details about why you might want to bring specific knowledge into your assessment. And like I said, it provides the context to facilitate knowledge provisioning. And as the workflow gets a little bit more mature, you can continue to start adding in different things that may be automated. So each of our different assets have these things called elements in them. And these elements are kind of different metadata or attributes that allow you to kind of attach this context or this reason for tagging something. And with projects, as this workflow gets more advanced, we can start to automate what knowledge is pulled in. We can start to automate maybe who is assigned to an assessment based on the type of project it is. We can automate really what is happening when you select this project in terms of the assessment. And finally, enables efficient reporting. Having project as a reportable element, in our reporting, you can separate out different things based on the project there. All right, the fourth, final one, we're almost there, is the knowledge packet. And this is a structured granular unit of know-how. So this is where the actual knowledge is captured. And when we think about different things that we might want to put into a knowledge packet, there's 4 of them. They are, first, it's items that need to be completed. So again, kind of back to our checklist example, if we're thinking about a checklist that has 10 items, we might create 10 different K-packs that go into an assessment, and we're going to go through them as a checklist. Standard work, also like our previous example, utilizing K-packs to capture standard work. We can then deliver them into an assessment that accomplishes that standard work. Places where decisions are made or evidence provided, like the traceability or audit example. Creating a K-pack where these are made allows us to not only give detail to the user about what the best practices are, what the requirements are, what they should be looking for, how to execute this audit or traceability trail, but it also gives us a place in the actual assessment where you can collect the evidence. So you might attach something to it. You might write an explanation. You might fill out a value table that gives some evidence of what was actually happening. So when we create a knowledge packet with this in mind, that we want to have a decision made or evidence provided, we are offered that ability to do that as well. And then finally, steps within a standard process. And this is the one that's a little bit different than the others. I think Mikayla is going to go over that in one of her presentations, but this method KPAC, we call it, is a bit of a more visual representation, or you might think of it as a process flow in a visual way here. But it's allowing us to capture different steps that are often linear or often sequential in a different way, that the knowledge is actually the process itself. And there's some things that you can do beyond that, but for the purposes of this presentation, we'll just keep it to steps within a standard process. And when we think about the critical functions of a KPAC, it's going to enable, as I said, the knowledge collection, sharing, and reuse. So this is the place where the subject matter expert would go in and actually record the knowledge. This can be shared across Auros IQ in a number of different ways across communities, between users, and it can be reused. And it's the reuse aspect of it that's creating that data footprint. We are reusing the knowledge, and as we do that, we're creating this continuous record of what's happening with that knowledge as we're doing it. And with the KPACs, it also is going to guide how the knowledge is used. So depending on how you set up your KPAC, there's either going to be some direction to the user about what do you do with it. In cases where the user is kind of making a manual effort to say if this is pass fail or good bad or red green, the KPAC itself is going to have some direction to the user. It's going to have that knowledge so the user knows what to do with it. There's also things called value tables that are a little bit more automated in nature, and again, we'll have Mikayla go through that a little bit later, but know that the KPAC is designed not only to provide knowledge, but it's also going to tell the user how to apply that knowledge. It provides detail that facilitates the knowledge provisioning. So again, back to that idea of attributes or tagging. When we construct a KPAC, it's going to have some detail on it that says when it should be provisioned into the assessment. So maybe it's something like this is a North American requirement, or this is for this specific assembly plant, or this is for an electrical process. It's going to have something on it that when we're looking at this bigger picture of the project, we're looking at the assessment, we're looking at the COP, it's going to tell us when that knowledge should be picked up and provisioned into the assessment. And it produces a footprint of how knowledge is applied over time. So as I've kind of touched on a few times, every time we're applying that knowledge, it's creating this record. And users can go in and not only see when the knowledge was provisioned, so in what instances are we using this knowledge? Maybe it's a process like mine, maybe it's a different process, but these are when it's being provisioned into an assessment. And you can also see the outcome of it. Was it a pass in this instance? Did it fail? Was it not applicable? And when we look at that data over time, we can not only improve the knowledge to make sure that it's fulfilling the needs that it wants to, but you can also look at the business process and the assessment itself to make sure that is continually improving over time. All right, so with those four in mind, I know that we kind of dropped you into the middle of that, but I'm gonna give you a couple examples. The first is agile sprint planning. And this is something similar to what we do at Auros with our software releases. And I'm gonna just kind of go through here the different ways that we can kind of associate what I just told you. So if we think about that, if we think about a software release process, we're gonna have that be the COP. So it's a software release. And the project that we use is a different software version. So if we're doing a software release business process with the software version, one time we do it, it might be for Auros IQ version 16, and then the next time we do it is for IQ 17. So it's kind of giving the context of what is happening here. Within the process, one of the different kind of tasks or activities within it could be the agile release process, and that's the assessment. So that's the work that we're trying to get done in this case. And with the information that the COP and the project provided to the assessment, it can then go out to the knowledge base and see what release standard work is appropriate to this context, this situation. And it's going to bring it into the assessment, and that's where the user is able to complete their work in that assessment. Similar occasion here, we have a design review process. Where in some of our customers' instances, they might do something like a vehicle program. So we're going to take the context of the vehicle program as the project. It's something that's repeatable for different vehicle programs. We're going to say which vehicle program you're working on. And in this case, the design review is also the assessment, just completing the design review at a various gate or various phase in the process. And with the context and the configurations and whatnot, again, we're going to go out to that knowledge base and select the proper product dev standard work for that, provision that into the assessment, and then that's where the work can be done. And finally, lessons learned, similar process. COP is the business process here. Read across is the activity that we're performing, with the supplier being one example of what you could do the project. This is one of those maybe not time-based things where you it's a supplier, it's persistent across there, and then going into that knowledge base and selecting, once again, lessons to bring up into the assessment. And in this case, we're kind of seeing with those lessons and the supplier, the work being done to see if the supplier meets the requirements of those lessons.
So in the design review,
Yep.
for example, right, you've got a process, and then you've got an assessment that is, I'm assuming that is the design review process at whichever phase that you're at.
Mm-hmm.
The vehicle program, the project, is identifying, the work that this team is doing. Okay, so this team is going through this process, and then the knowledge base is product standard work, product development standard work. Where is the actual data that is going to be reviewed in this design review? I don't see it based on this, but so please help me understand that.
Okay, so instead of saying product dev standard work, that could say design guidelines. So your design guidelines are provisioned into that assessment, and that's where the data is that you're evaluating in the design review.
They're going to have to look at drawings. They're going to have to look at things that were done, actual work products. Where are these work products? And the guidelines would be what they're going to assess the work products against.
Okay, so one of the next presentations gets into this a little bit, but in the design review, traditionally the designer has their design guidelines, and they're looking, does my CAD model or whatever asset they're querying against meet these design guidelines that I have in my assessment? So they're manually going back and forth. There are things like SmartCAD where we can integrate and check those design guidelines automatically without the designer having to go back and forth between two separate systems. But that depends on the maturity of the workflow in the process.
Okay, so to understand then, this is setting up the design review formally. So this is formalizing the design review so everybody does it the same way?
Yep, that's correct. So it was accurate when you said the process is the design review. The assessment is maybe the design review at a certain gate. And what's in that assessment are the things that need to be checked at that gate. And then just based on maturity is whether you're having to go into another system or whether that data is being checked automatically.
Thank you.
Does that answer your question? Okay.
Any other questions? It was a great question. Thank you. Okay. So this is an introductory lesson, but we wanted to show you just a little bit in the software also of just a very high level what we're talking about. So this is an example of an assessment. In this case, it's in a line item view. So each of these different lines are a KPAC, and this is the assessment as a whole. And we're living inside a community. In this case, it's the simple demo community. So when we created this assessment, we took in information about what project we were going to do. We chose the community of practice that we were going to be in. And essentially that was creating the assessment. And this is kind of what a user would see when this is set up. You can see on each of these different KPACs, there's some information that the user can read, description, they can put an explanation in. Mikayla will go through some of the other things that you can do on a KPAC. But we also see that this conformance here, and this is the way that they are interacting with or evaluating the knowledge in this. So they're choosing between green, red, and alert. I would think in this case, this is probably based on some of the instructions that were in the description here. It's instructed the person how to evaluate it, but this is the green, red, or alert. They're choosing the conformance. And as they work through that, they would essentially complete the assessment and complete the work in the business process. And then this is just a very brief preview of the other type of KPAC that I talked about in the presentation. So this is a bit of the more visual nature of presenting steps in a process. This is a decision model here, but the user, instead of interacting with the different line items, they would interact with this model and work through that there. Again, this is the assessment itself. We're within a community. It's captured information about the project, the context from the project, and they're now interacting or evaluating the knowledge. And I know this was a lot, so open up the floor again for any questions that you all have.
Yeah, my name is Arib, and I'm from the Eaton. If you go back to the previous slide, it shows the the next one, please. Here, there's a workflow that you put together. Is there like a custom workflow that we can make and modify based on the application, or it has to be managed the way you have defined it?
If I understand the question correctly, so each of these steps within here, we have, steps where you are making a decision, steps where we could attach it as an assessment itself, steps where they're just providing information. So all that is configurable. The visuals of it, it's very much like Visio. If you've used Visio,
right.
You have a lot of different components there. And essentially it's completely configurable. We can even have it so there's multiple different stages within an assessment here. So it doesn't all have to be even on one screen. We could look at this as one step or one stage, and then we move on to the next one.
Okay. So which means that it can be configurable based on the requirement of the business.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions? We have a few minutes. I do have one for you, Ashley. So if I want to know more about these Auros assets or these fundamentals, is there any place I can go get more information?
Yeah, so there's a number of resources that are available. One of the newer things that we have available for Auros IQ customers is we have a learning resources webpage, and we'll make sure everyone can get the URL to that. But on that, we've posted the presentations that we give to our seed projects. So those are people who are beginning the process. They are starting to construct their own workflow. One of the presentations is very similar to this. So it's a great way to kind of get your feet wet and see what else is going on. This is just the very fundamental basics, but we also talk about, from here, creating an actual assessment, evaluating an assessment and whatnot. So we think that's a great place to start. There's also a number of videos available from these conferences or just about Auros IQ in general that you can also check out on YouTube.